Hello and welcome to ElseNerds, a production of Galactic Network. I'm Gregor Sprague.
And I'm Corey Scott.
For all info on this show, including show notes and subscription links, go to ElseNerds.com. And for other Galactic Network programs, go to gncast.com.
On ElseNerds, we might spoil things for you. We might say some bad words, and we might have Tom Merritt show up.
Damn. Yeah, that's the case. This week we have the author of Boiling Point, Citadel 32, his latest book, Pilot X, and podcaster and host of such shows like Cord Killers, which he was just on not too long ago, DTNS, both of which I listened to while at work, so that was awesome. Pretend I'm Dumb About Star Wars, FSL Tonight, and so much more. Tom, how are you doing, sir?
I am fantastic. Thanks, you guys, for having me on.
Not
Thank
a
you
problem.
For being here. I'm actually wearing a Twin Peaks shirt in your honor.
Ah, that's a damn fine shirt. Corey,
you're all right.
I haven't seen Twin Peaks, so I wouldn't know the reference.
You should be watching the show and listening along to Tom and Ron do their show, Damn Fine Podcast.
Yes, definitely.
Now's your chance to get in on the cult.
Yeah. So we're going to kick things off with the ElseNerds, ElseNews of the week. And we're kicking things off with basically the CW getting a whole nother show. I mean, a whole nother superhero show. I mean, they've got every day of the week except Friday that has a superhero show or a comic book show for that matter. So why not add another one? Greg Berlanti's Black Lightning moves to the CW with a pilot pickup. Now, Black Lightning, that's from, Corey, that's from the Wildstorm universe, is that correct?
No, Black Lightning is kind of a seminal character, one of the first African-American characters in comics, and certainly in DC's universe, has been around since the 70s. I believe Denny O'Neil did one of the most definitive runs of the character, but he was in Batman the Outsiders in the 80s. I remember a story distinctly where he was invited to join the Justice League, and he decided against it because he felt like they didn't concentrate on street level crimes and urban neighborhoods, and he just thought that was not really for him, but has been utilized so much. He has two daughters in the DC universe as well, or has over time, one of which was part of an Outsiders group years later that was run by Dick Grayson and Roy Harper, and another one that was part of the JSA.
Nice. So, Tom, how are you familiar, besides the crash course introduction of Black Lightning? How familiar are you with him?
I am not familiar at all with Black Lightning, so I'm very curious to see how this blends in to the DCW that is shaping up. Every DC show coming to the CW, which is great. I actually enjoy 3 of the 4 very much, and Legends of Tomorrow's okay. I go in and out on my love of that. I like a lot of the characters, but they're all very different in tone, right? And so bringing in Black Lightning sounds like it's a way to take something that's even farther from each other than the other ones, which is cool.
Yeah. The other thing I sort of wonder is, are we getting to a point with the DCW shows, like you so elegantly coined there, where we're going to hit oversaturation, and where we're going to run into the problems of some shows are going to have to leave in order to get these new shows?
Well, they may be hedging their bets a little bit there, right? By bringing in another one. That way you are able to drop one. Arrow's been going for a while. They're going to drop the flashbacks after this season. And as much as I like that show, and it was the first one, I don't know how much longer you can run that show.
Yeah.
Yeah, they've already had characters that have died and then they have to search for replacements for on that show. They've gone through 2 different sort of ensemble casts to have them have a Team Arrow. One team that was all based around being Arrow Light, and now the new team, which is more various form of heroes. Which to me is more interesting because it gives us aspects of a Justice League without actually giving us a Justice League. But yeah, you're right. The tonal difference of the shows is part of what makes it work. Supergirl is very lighthearted and has a good element to it that's sort of tonally felt similar to The Flash when it first started, but I think has improved and got its own voice a little bit more, while it still seems like she steals a little too much from the Superman mythos. You can't really say that that's weird because they do the same thing with Arrow ripping off Batman left and right.
Yeah, and I think that's intentional, right?
Yeah, exactly. And what I like about Black Lightning is if they follow the character from the comics, he was a school teacher, which is something that I don't think we've seen represented in any of the shows so far. And if they do have it follow him as a father, that's another aspect that we haven't really seen much of. So I think that there's a lot that could be played with, on top of the fact that it's a person of color, which we haven't had a lead on one of the shows be that yet.
No, yeah, definitely. I am looking forward to this, but I do wonder, Arrow makes sense in the logical, I think we made the joke on a past episode of when we get to season 6, are they then going to talk about do a flashback to his first year in Starling City and stuff like that, or how are they going to rework the show? But it could make sense for that to eventually be replaced and all that. But I don't know.
I mean, Legends of Tomorrow is the more likely one to be replaced because it's just not as popular, and they're having a hard time finding the real direction of that show. But it's also newer, so they're not spending as much money on it. The stars haven't been as round. The contracts aren't building up as high as they get on an older show. So I look at Arrow and I think, yeah, okay, season 6. They can probably do. Can they stretch it to a 7 or beyond? It's hard to see.
Yeah.
Right. And plus, we're also seeing with some of the characters that have been on these shows, them getting contracts that allow them to cross over between all the different shows as opposed to being tied down to one program. And that's happened more with the villains. But Mr. Freeze and John Barrowman's character, and I think Zoom is one of them. They're all getting utilized in ways that they're not strictly a Flash character or an Arrow character, but they get to work their way between all the different programs. And so if Stephen Amell decides not to continue with Arrow, that doesn't mean that he doesn't get to still be Green Arrow on other programs.
Yeah, which may be a better option to say, let's pay Steve his rate to show up as a guest star from time to time on Black Lightning, on Supergirl, and get a big pop out of that, versus continuing to play that. That said, I really don't see them canceling Arrow anytime soon. No. And the fact that they're bringing Black Lightning in means that they're bullish. They're riding the hot wave here. And how does Fox pass on this? Is it because they look at the CW and they say everyone's going to think it's a CW show because it's Berlanti anyway? It's not going to fit. I don't quite understand why they would be so committed to it and then at the last minute drop it.
I think it could have been something along the lines of, like, Fox has this innate ability to just cancel greatness. Like shows that could be really great and then they go, no, sort of deal. But I don't know, Corey, what do you think?
I think that what it probably is that Fox was expecting it was going to star Sinbad, because Sinbad had done the Saturday Night Live skit in the 80s where Black Lightning was the only one not invited to Superman's funeral. And I mean, why would you not want to get Sinbad back?
So they probably have some kind of option on his contract too.
Yeah, I would think. The last thing I actually remember him being in was an episode of American Dad. So who knows?
No, yeah, true. And also, I do think I want to add that I believe with like the Vampire Diaries is their final season. So the CW does have openings. It's just they are eventually they might as well change their name to DCW or something like that.
I mean, they're trying to be the millennial network, right? Yeah. But it is mostly genre shows. I mean, Jane the Virgin is a pretty big hit that's not squarely in that genre. But everything else has a horror or sci-fi aspect to it, even Riverdale.
Yeah, Riverdale definitely has taken the comic idea into a completely different direction. But when they've tried other things, they seem to kind of be very hit or miss in landing more on the miss side, which is too bad. Jane the Virgin has done well. Crazy Ex-Girlfriend is an excellent show and shows a lot of originality and has gotten good recognition, but I don't know if it's gotten the numbers that it should. But at least they followed up with it and given it another season. I think it's been renewed for seasons 3 already, which is great. But yeah, at some point they need to think about diversifying a little bit more. And the question is, how many more seasons are we going to get out of shows that have been there for so long, like Supernatural, which is a hit show, but can't continue indefinitely?
Apparently it can, though. Like that, I remember it being teased in Smallville after what's his name left Smallville and joined Supernatural. It's been forever. Like I didn't have Wi-Fi, I think, when that show first went on the air.
Yeah.
I think I might have still been recording Buffy episodes on my computer because I didn't have the ability to burn discs on my TiVo yet.
Exactly.
Nice. And I think I just got high-speed internet at that point. But yeah, so the next story is one that Tom, you actually covered on Sword and Laser. That's the apocalyptic comedy Good Omens, from American Gods authors coming to Amazon as a limited event series. So this, I don't know anything about this at all.
Ooh.
Yeah, it's the sheltered life I've lived. But yeah, so it's all I know is that Neil Gaiman is involved with it, and
Neil Gaiman co-wrote the book with Terry Pratchett, who unfortunately recently passed away just in the last 2 years, I think. But they wrote the series. It's kind of a version of I would compare it to The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, except about the apocalypse instead of space.
Yeah, it's a beautiful meeting of minds, and we already miss Terry Pratchett, even though he's only been gone for less than 2 years, and it's bittersweet to see this finally come to television without Mr. Pratchett around to appreciate it. But Neil Gaiman's the showrunner of this, and so if anybody can keep Pratchett's spirit alive in it, it's Neil Gaiman, who wrote this book with Pratchett, and it is the best of both of their senses of humor and darkness combined. I mean, it's basically an angel and a demon when the apocalypse begins to come, and there's the 4 horse people of the apocalypse, and the angel and the demon are kind of like lower level, mid-level employees of their various organizations who know they're really supposed to be in competition, but occasionally hang out and chat and share tips about their various workplaces.
Yeah, they're work rivals that are still kind of buddy. It's You're not my favorite person in the world. I know I'm not supposed to like you, but I feel more comforted by the fact that I see you every day than some of the other people that I'm actually supposed to be on the same side with.
No, it sounds
and
really
as I
cool.
recall, because it's been a long time since I've read it, but they essentially try to subvert the apocalypse.
Yeah, because Agnes Nutter, witch, is the one who prophesies that it's going to end on a Saturday. And so the armies of good and evil all get together for one last final battle. And these 2 employees are like, well, maybe it shouldn't end. I mean, isn't there a way out of this? Just again, like your classic average employee who's like, oh man, I really don't want that.
Saturday doesn't work for me.
Have a nice life.
No, it sounds cool. And now, I mean, Neil Gaiman, I know he's done writing for like Doctor Who. Has he ever showrun anything though?
Well, he has worked in and on shows. So he's written, like you say, for Doctor Who. He was involved very closely with Brian Fuller on American Gods, which of course we have yet to see. But yeah, I think this is his first time actually being the showrunner. So it's a big step up.
Yeah.
And he's worked on scripts for his movies throughout time. He's been in development hell with things like Sandman.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And a lot of other stuff for so long that I think he's certainly got the ins in Hollywood when it comes to doing this kind of series. It's just that he's finally starting to get some of the recognition. Like, this book was written when he was still, I think, pretty early into the time of writing Sandman. So people thought of him as a comic book writer, not a novelist. And I think this was also around the time that he was starting to release books of short stories, and people were seeing, oh, there's a lot more to this guy than just his Vertigo work. But it also was co-written with Terry Pratchett, who was a very prolific writer that had a huge fan base and people had an expectation of. Neil had also written a book for Douglas Adams about the Hitchhiker series that, again, kind of shows where his interests lie. He's always had a thing for that kind of comedic, semi-buddy comedy thing, but he does do dark fiction really well. He did a lot of Lovecraft style stories and stuff in the Lovecraft universe. I think this is a great example of something that he can do. And like Tom said, we'll show mad respect to Terry because he's very uplifting to the other authors that he's either worked with or known or admired. He's never going to underserve them by putting his stuff first. But I think it's about time to see him get to lead a project and have it come to full fruition, as opposed to have it like, oh, we've been hearing about the Sandman movie and Joseph Gordon-Levitt's going to do it and all this stuff is going to happen, and then it just disappears.
Yeah,
definitely. Yeah, I think that's what I had, Tom.
Nothing else except to note that the apocalypse in the book takes place in 2018, and the TV show will debut on Amazon and BBC in 2018.
It's kind of funny how some of these things are working out where the timing is landing just right, because the Twin Peaks coming back at around the 20-year mark, when it was the last thing that was said is I'll see you in 20 years.
Yeah.
It's really interesting. Like we're just kind of, everybody who's been a geek about these things for so long has gotten to the point where we're either in the industry or we're all such big fans that we're kind of like, what happens if Twin Peaks came back right at the time that it should? You know, what happens if a book that talks about the apocalypse in 2018, which now seems a little more feasible than I wanted to, actually we get that book made into a TV series right then? That's pretty ideal.
Yeah, good set dressing.
Way to piss off all the Back to the Future fans who still are waiting for their hoverboards.
Oh,
hey,
man.
We got a couple of things that were very hoverboard-like.
Yeah.
And we got self-lacing shoes. So, and we got the Cubs. Not that I enjoyed that personally as a Cardinals fan, but a lot of people did.
Yeah. Oh, trust me, I'm a Lions fan. I know about plenty of regrets.
Yeah.
Well, that is it for the ElseNews, and we will be right back. And we are back, and it is time with for the ElseViews with Tom Merritt. And so we each picked something that we've been, just digging over the past while. And I think I'll kick mine off first, since I've loved the show. I've loved the Top Gear boys for a while now. I should say the Grand Tour guys. And the first series finale has concluded. And so why not talk about the Grand Tour? Now, Tom, have you been watching the Grand Tour?
No, I've never been a Top Gear fan. And I watched a little bit of the first episode of the Grand Tour just to see that intro where Jeremy Clarkson and Amazon kind of thumb their noses at the BBC. Hilarious when they're cooperating on the Good Omen that we just talked about. But that was really funny to see that. But yeah, I have not watched any of this season.
Yeah. No, yeah, I've enjoyed it as a Top Gear fan. But I do have problems with the show. They set up replacing their star in a reasonably priced car with Celebrity Brain Crash, where it's basically a joke of, oh, they killed like Jeremy Renner, Army Hammer, and Carol Vorderman in the first episode, and by these different accidents that have happened, and they kept on going. I'm like, it is where it is funny in the moment. I would like to see them actually do this thing, not just it's time for Celebrity Brain Crash and their brain crashed into a mine or something like that. It doesn't seem like that would last for continued seasons on. One of the things I do recommend especially for car fans is to watch it with the X-ray on Amazon. I've watched every episode twice. Once just sitting down and watching it, the second time, either watching it on my tablet with the X-ray turned on the whole time, or every 5 seconds moving the mouse to see another tidbit, because there's so many facts that they don't get to say about the car that they'll put in here, or if they use a British word that we don't have in the American language, they'll be like, this is what it means, or stuff like that. And there's a couple times where is Jeremy Clarkson writing these? Because they seem to paint him in the best picture ever and just pick on James May. And
must have approval over him then.
Yeah. And it's really cool. The cars are really, really cleverly done. I actually don't mind the American they got for their Stig. It's a guy named Mike Skinner, who's a former NASCAR driver, to do the test drives, and it seriously just makes me wish that they had a star in a car or something like that, because it would be cool to see um see them race, see them talk about the cars, especially when we had the not so great season that was this last season of Top Gear and all that.
So overall, did you watch the previous season or the most recent season of Top Gear as well?
Yes. Yeah, with Chris Evans from England, not Captain America, and Matt LeBlanc, and it was good. I'm actually really excited for the next season of Top Gear, because I said it when Chris Evans said that he was leaving. I was like, all right, they already have their 3 people they need to host: Matt LeBlanc, Chris Harris, and Rory Reed, who the other 2 were on their BBC 3 Extra Gear. They were the hosts on that, and it's like you get those 3 guys together, you have the new James May, Richard Clarkson, Jeremy Clarkson and Richard Hammond, for this next generation.
So it's almost like a palate cleanser season. You have to get through the fact that it's not the show that you liked before. It's not the people that you might have been watching it for. You say, all right, I'm gonna check the season out, and you can kvetch all about it for a little while, and then it's like the season follow-up. It's, oh, okay, well, now I'm already used to it not being the same, but maybe I like these guys a little bit more than who was just on there.
Yeah.
Shout out to Rory Reed too, CNET alum from CNET UK, who's made good. I'm very excited to see that.
Yeah, those CNET people, they never seem to go anywhere.
Some of them. Yeah. Rory's the exception.
But yeah, so that's my ElseView. Corey, what do you got?
I just briefly last night, I've been wanting to check out the series, and I brought it up before we started the show tonight. You and Beatmaster hadn't even heard of it. It's a Netflix exclusive series called Travelers. It stars Eric McCormack and a bunch of people that I've unfortunately never heard of before. Mackenzie Porter, Nessa Cooper. I only watched the pilot. And so one of the things that's going on right now is I'm a little bit tired of time travel stories, because I feel like, especially on shows like The Flash, where when you start to introduce time travel into the show, that suddenly becomes all that the show is about. I find that a little unfortunate. And it's been so many time travel shows have been popping up. There's a new one that's based off of Time After Time that's coming out, which I really loved that movie when I was a kid. But I'm not sure if I want to watch a continuing series about it. There's the one that's on NBC, which I think is Timeless. There's been a few. This comes at it from a different side. So this series is people that are about to hit their expiration point, meaning they're about to die. Instead of just completely dying, someone jumps in their body, a la Quantum Leap. Someone from the future. So in the future, which I, at this point in the show, have not seen, they realize that things have gotten really bad. Most of humanity has been wiped out. They're trying to go back and course correct the planet to fix this before it happens. So we spend the first hour being introduced to people, seeing them. We get a countdown to about a minute before they die, seeing them fall to the ground, kind of black out for a second, come back up, and there's another person living in their body. Now, one of the actresses, the main character that we see first, is she's got some learning disabilities. She can't read. She stutters. She works at a library. All of a sudden, a person comes in, and all of those things are gone. The counselor that's been working with her realizes that something's wrong. Her doctor realizes something's wrong. They're trying to figure it out. She's talking about her life like, oh, well, I work at a library. I'm a librarian, and I do this and everything. But it turns out that all of the things that they understand about what her life was like was actually false. It was a fake identity kind of set up through her Facebook. to make her feel a little bit more normalcy. So she's trying to deal with that. Another one of the characters, she's a mom. Her husband is an abusive husband who's also a cop. He comes in, punches her. Basically, that's what kills her. But the new person comes in and takes over and is not putting up with this crap anymore. It's pretty good. And so we spend the first episode with a cop sort of investigating them, studying some things that are going on online and realizing there's some sort of conspiracy happening. He's trailing them around. And that leads into Eric McCormack's character becoming the fifth member of the group. It's pretty cool because it takes it in a different direction. Than it's not just time travel of jumping back and forth in time, trying to fix history that we've already seen. It's trying to fix history going forward. And I think that makes it a little bit more palatable. Really good characters, really good acting in it so far. The production values are good. But I think that what happened is that it just fell under the radar because there's so much good stuff coming out on Netflix that they're all kind of like blending into each other now. And you can't tell when something has hit the stream versus all the other stuff. Like the OA is on there right now. There's a bunch of other things that have been hitting. We just saw the commercial for the season 2 of Stranger Things, and that's all anybody wants to talk about. And I don't blame them because I'm all for that. But I feel like this is something that probably got overlooked and maybe deserves a little bit more recognition. It feels not dissimilar to how much I was enjoying the story of Sense8, although Sense8 is filmed in a different way that is just awe-strikingly beautiful. This isn't that, but it is pretty solid.
Awesome. I honestly look forward to seeing that, or at the very least, you telling me more about it, as it has happened with other shows that we've mentioned. I'm like, oh wait, that sounds great. I should watch that. Completely forget about it. You mentioned it again. I'm like, oh yeah, that sounds really good. Tell me more.
Yeah, in about 25 years, Tom and Ron Richards are going to do a podcast about it when it comes back.
Yeah, when they do the reboot where they show people in the apocalypse before they leave. But I have a minor question about this, which is if the people die, how are you able to re-inhabit their body and not still have the problem that caused them to die?
Well, that's the interesting thing. It's like it leads up to the point where they're about to die, and I think it solves it. One of them is supposed to die from a heroin overdose, and I think he shoots up, and it just doesn't quite happen in the way that it was supposed to. They cut it off at the second before. Eric McCormack's character, which is a spoiler for the first episode, is supposed to fall down an elevator shaft. They save him from doing that.
Okay, all right.
So in the wife's case, she was going to get beaten to death. She does get hit, and she does hit her head on a counter, but it was going to escalate. And because the other person comes in, it doesn't get to escalate. So
they're essentially saving the body's life, but
right.
They don't feel bad because if they didn't do anything, that person would have died.
They would have died anyway. So now this person who was no longer supposed to be a part of the past, they can use to influence it.
Interesting. Yeah, I think what's going on with Netflix now is they aren't putting highlights on every original they have because they have so many. They really don't care. They're just hoping that the people who would like these shows will have them show up in their suggested, tab of shows. And then they don't need to go out and do a whole lot of other marketing.
Yeah, I'm not even sure if there's a made by Netflix or a Netflix exclusive category so much as you're right. It's just like these things are trending, or these things are trending in sci-fi, these things are trending in horror.
Based on the fact that you like such and such, we think you might like this too.
Yeah, because I had to search for this. I didn't remember the name, but I knew that it starred Eric McCormack, and I was like, I want to see this. So what am I looking for exactly?
Yeah.
And it was nice to finally be on Netflix and look for something specific as opposed to just going through the list for 2 hours and falling asleep.
I'm a big fan of time travel stories, but I know what you mean. Like a lot of people really like Timeless on NBC, and I couldn't get through the first episode. It just felt really cheap.
Yeah, and I love the people that were in it, but
the actors are great.
The storyline was just, it felt such a rehash of so many other shows that are either on right now or that I've seen over time that I couldn't get into it.
Yeah, I think with Timeless, I got through the first 3 episodes, and it was like, okay, if I really wanted this, I can get the time travel episodes in Doctor Who, or the other, or the Flash, and have or not Flash, Legends of Tomorrow actually, and get check off more of my likes than these actors and actresses that I do find that I do like watching and all that stuff, and continuing on that way.
Yeah, it felt really safe to me, which, I mean, it's a pilot, and I always say pilots are a bad example, probably the worst example of whether or not you're going to like a show.
For sure.
But it just, at that point in time, I already knew that it was a long shot.
Yeah. So Tom, you have a TV show here that I think me and Corey have both seen, but it's The Expanse. So how far are you? The season premiere? Is that how?
Yeah, so season 2 of The Expanse came back this past week, and it is a science fiction show based on a series of books by James S.A. Corey. James S.A. Corey is actually a team of Daniel Abraham and Ty Frank. I am a huge fan of the books. Babylon's Ashes is the latest that just came out in December. So this pick of mine is for the books and the television show. And you decide which one you want to get into first. I can't tell you could go wrong either way. The books are fantastic. They introduce you to this whole world and these characters, but the television show really capitalizes on that world and those strong characters that James S.A. Corey built and turns it into a compelling TV show that stands on its own. The rough version of it, both for the book and the TV show, is that Mars has separated from Earth sometime in the past, and so is trying to terraform Mars into becoming a new Earth-like planet. The Earth is run by the United Nations now. It's a unified planet, and there are a ton of colonies and mining stations and research stations in the asteroid belt, as well as some of the smaller moons, like the moons of Saturn and Jupiter. And those people are referred to as the Belters. The Belters are essentially under the thumb of either Mars or Earth or both. And because they grow up in these low gravity situations, in a place where you have to be very careful about conserving air and conserving water, they have a culture that is distinct from Earth and Mars. The people tend to be a little taller and a little skinnier because of the low gravity. They have their own language that is a melange of several Earth languages, and they all sort of hate Earth and Mars, particularly Earth. So there's a loose association called the Outer Planets Alliance, the OPA, which is run by a guy who's actually from Earth named Fred Johnson. And at the beginning of season 1, an incident happens that sorts of ignites all these tensions between the Earth, Mars, and the OPA. And the suspicion is that someone's trying to start a war here. And in season 2, after an incident on one of the asteroids with this blue gunk that was killing people, we discover a little more about what's going on and who's behind it. And so I hear it often described as Game of Thrones meets Battlestar Galactica, because it's got this political element that's very Game of Thrones-like, but it's got this living in space element with a very true to what it would actually be like to live in space element that's very Battlestar Galactica.
No, yeah. One of the big things that I enjoyed, because I got into it when it was on Netflix, and then got almost all the way done. Like, I think I was on episode 6, and then I just forgot about it, and then re-caught up on it on Amazon Prime, was the sound. Like, they do this super accurate thing of, if the camera is out in space, you hear nothing, or it is very muffled and all that. And I'm like, wait, my speakers work? Wait, oh.
yeah.
That's the one, like, one of the things I caught on to, and I'm like, sold. Watching more.
Well, one of the things I loved about the books, and they carried this through in the TV show, is that James S.A. Corey, particularly Ty Frank, I think, tried to say, we're not going to invent warp drive. We're not going to invent anything that you couldn't do based on the scientific knowledge we have today. So it's going to take a long time to go from one place to another. And a lot of the stuff in the book talks about how having a battle in space is quite different because nothing ever stops, right? There's no wind resistance to make something stop. So when you shoot a railgun, those bullets just keep going, and they don't fall anywhere. They just keep going in a straight line. And when you're moving around in high G, it's going to be hard on your body when you try to outmaneuver someone and take evasive maneuvers. And so if there is a sort of invented technology, it's the drugs that get pumped into you by the chairs and the ships to help you deal with all of those high G forces.
Yeah. And the fact that there's a populace that has sort of been bred to be better at that. Yeah. I like the fact that it sort of reminds me of half-elves from Dungeons and Dragons, except they form their own society, essentially, because half-elves are they're just on the cusp of either humans or elves. But if they had all gathered and built something together, then maybe they would have been a more successful race.
Yeah.
And that's what the Belters sound like.
If the wizards and the elves and the humans had all used the half-elves to build a bunch of space stations.
Had used them to build their castles to keep it within the fantasy.
Yeah.
Now, Tom, you've been a fan of the books for a while.
Yeah, we were lucky enough on Sword and Laser to interview Ty and Daniel right before the second book came out. So I read Leviathan Wakes, the first in the series, right before we did that interview, and I loved it. And then I've been reading them as they came out ever since.
And you had a similar luck with Man in the High Castle, where it was a book series that you really liked, and all of a sudden they made a TV series for it.
Yeah, I can't claim I read The Man in the High Castle when it came out in the 60s because I wasn't alive yet, but it was a book that I actually discovered because I was taking a film class at the University of Illinois, and we read Blade Runner, and in the reading material for the course, there was I can't remember if it was a journal article or just a newspaper article, but it was something we'd been assigned to read about Blade Runner and the book by Philip K. Dick, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, which mentioned The Man in the High Castle. And so I went and I checked it out of the library and read it and loved it. And it's my favorite book. When someone asks me what my favorite book is, it's usually what I recommend because it's about what happened if Germany and Japan had won World War II. And it's also got the typical Philip K. Dick paranoia and an interesting weaving of plots. So I was really excited when Amazon did the pilot of that. And yeah, that seems to have turned into a pretty successful show in its own right. And it's even going well beyond what Philip K. Dick had written in the book.
Yeah. So Hollywood needs to be paying attention to Tom Merritt's bookshelf because apparently he picks all the great stuff that is now being made into TV series.
When Memoirs Found in a Bathtub by Stanislav Lem is made into a TV show or movie series, then you'll know that I'm infallible.
Nice. But yeah, and we'll have links to all three of our picks in our show notes. So yeah, that is it for the ElseViews. We will be right back. And it is time for ElseWords. This is our discussion, and we're just going to discuss about Tom. We're going to pretend he's not even here, and me and Corey are just going to gab about him.
Oh, great!
No. We're going to have we're going to talk with Tom because like I mentioned in his introduction, this guy, Tom, besides being one of my podcasting heroes here, he's doing so many things, hosting so many shows, and
that Tom Merritt is a hoopy fruit who really knows where his towel is.
Exactly. But yes, we figured we would, ask you, and also because you got Pilot X coming out here in a little bit and all that. So, so Tom, well, first off, can I just say thank you for naming your teams in FSL tonight because I use them for fantasy football.
Oh yeah, good. I'm glad to hear that. That's great. That's it's team effort. Me and Justin both.
Yeah, I will say it's fun to see that the trophy for my fantasy football league when we actually had one was won by the LA Guardians of the Galaxy.
Ah, fantastic. That was one of my favorite jokes. The Los Angeles Angels of Anaheim joke on the Guardians of the Galaxy.
And then this year I had, oh gosh, what was the team? I'll have to think of the team, but I didn't do quite so well with the other team. Like, just couldn't get it. Should have kept with LA Guardians of the Galaxy. But yeah, so
Xandar.
I think I did a different team because I was looking through. I'm like, all right, I need to get a different one. I am actually going to check real quick, but no. So I mean, how do you come up with all these different ideas for shows to do? I mean, like we've mentioned, you've got the Damn Fine podcast, you've got, FSL Tonight's, Cord Killers, DTNS. Some of them seem a little obvious from past works, but others it's just like, okay, let's take a listen.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know where the ideas come from. It's a combination of my interests intersecting with something that people seem to be interested in talking about, intersecting with people that I want to work with. So, I mean, Current Geek is essentially Scott Johnson and I saying, let's do a show about all the things that both of us like to talk about.
And the stuff that doesn't make it into your shows throughout the week.
Yeah.
It's sort of the catch-all for all the other geek stuff.
Totally. It's just a chance for us to shoot the breeze and have some cool folks on and talk with them. FSL Tonight particularly came out of a post Dragon Con discussion between myself, Justin Robert Young, and Veronica Belmont, where we were seeing people with these T-shirts that kind of were imitating sports teams, and I think the one that set me off was the fantasy baseball T-shirt, where it's a wizard with a baseball bat. And I was like, what if there was a league and the teams were all of these different tribes, right? Like the Star Trek people, and you were cheering for them, and it just kind of built itself from there, because Justin and I both are also sports fans, and Justin's a huge fan of Sports Talk Radio, and I've watched and listened to enough myself that I can mimic that style, and so it just became fun. But the other stuff, yeah, Brian Brushwood and I wanted to do a show together, so we came up with Frame Rate, which eventually became Cord Killers, and that's just kind of the way it goes with all of these.
Yeah. I think that was more of a self-validating question, because that's how this show came to be too, but it was with Glenn Rubenstein before he said, I'm too busy, I can't do it, and me and Corey were like, all right, we'll continue it.
Yeah.
Yeah, the real question is, how do you find all the time? It seems like that's the problem, is that you come up with a great concept for a show, but being able to execute that show regularly and hitting a level of production to make it both worth your time and to be able to show it to fans and have the fans feel like it's worth their time. That's complicated. Now you're obviously you're new to this, and that's why we're leading you through this whole thing.
Thank you.
But you work with people like Veronica and Justin and Brian and Scott and Ron, that are all pros, that all know how to make shows, that have been doing this longer than almost anybody. When it comes to the podcasting world, you know all the experts and have worked with all the experts, I think. But it's tough. It's tough to just say, okay, we're going to talk about a show that's 20 years old and yes, has a revival coming up, but can we find the audience for this show at this point? Or is it still either forming because the new series hasn't started, or is it just missed its mark because 20 years ago?
Yeah, I mean, with Damn Fine Podcast, it was essentially me and Ron Richards emailing each other in excitement that Showtime announced they were going to bring back the show, and immediately saying we should do a podcast about it. And all the shows I do have started with, I really want to do X. And then we say, okay, well, how would we make a show about that takes the excitement we have and turns it into something enjoyable to listen to? And I think that's one of the keys, is doing things that you're interested in. A couple other tricks are to go live to tape so that you don't have a lot of editing time, and using the listeners and the audience to help guide you with emails and things like subreddits and stuff like that.
Yeah, and you keep it interesting with great guests and stuff too.
Definitely.
It's nice every week I'm finding new people or people that I just haven't heard for a while show up on Current Geek, and I'm always super excited. Although I have to say my favorite guest still continues to be Jenny Josephson.
Jenny's great. Yeah,
brilliant.
That's awesome.
She's so good. Beat has threatened to bring her onto the show at some point, and I always get nervous about it.
Oh, she'd be great. I'm sure she'd love to do it too.
She'd be great. I would just be like looking at her like Chris Farley looking at Paul McCartney. Just hi, you're awesome. But yeah, I think that's the key, is that you have to love and believe in what you're talking about. And if you don't love it, people will pick up on that really fast.
Yeah.
But you, to me, are not a typical podcaster, because one of the things that I've always looked at you as is you're like the Walter Concrete. Walter Concrete. No, I can't.
Walter Concrete. Yeah, that's just Walter a big block of concrete.
You're just a solid mass of man. You're a newscaster to me. You're someone that I trust to bring me a story and not weigh it down with your opinion more than the actual details of the story. Whereas, I mean, this is an opinion show. This is a review show. This is a news, but we put our spin on things show. And there's a lot of those out there. And I get that. I love that. I value that. But you're someone who always sees things from multiple angles, and you always lead with, full disclosure, my wife works for now Fandango, right. Which we've stolen a lot on this show. And I think that that's something that's very incredible. It is in a point in time right now where things are very politically charged. I would always trust you to bring me a story no matter what it's about, and I would get the actual facts of it before I get the opinion. And if you were going to state opinion, you would let me know ahead of time first, this is just opinion. And that, I think, challenges me when I do stuff, that I don't just lead with opinion first, or that I at least make it very clear that I don't know what I'm talking about.
That's the hard thing, is to actually know what you know and what you don't know, not to get too Rumsfeld about it. Like to say like these are the things that we're sure of. I've actually, taken the time to double check and say like, and see that the reliable sources say this, and which are the things that people are saying, but we don't know if it's actually true. And then what's my opinion? Because I'm not trying to be Walter Cronkite. I'm not even trying to be a newscaster. I'm just trying to start from a position of good information. So especially when I do Daily Tech News Show, but even in my other shows, I want to lay out the actual facts for people to say this, everything is subject to interpretation. Everything is subject to spin, but there are certain things that we can all agree are true. Like IDC said that Android shipped 97 million units last quarter. We can all debate how accurate IDC is, but it's got a pretty good track record, and we're not going to dispute that IDC isn't saying that, right? And then we go to, well, somebody's saying that next quarter Android devices are going to fall because they're going to stop using, bundling in Gmail, or they're going to charge for that. And it's like, okay, who's saying that? How reliable are they? And then we can go to opinion. Then we can have the discussion of, based on the things that we know and how reliable those things are, what do we think? And to me, that's just a good way to have a better discussion.
Yeah, and that's exactly why I've always looked at you with such value. Going back to your CNET days, is that you're someone that you would say something and I would feel absolute trust in what you were saying. Wow. Before I thought of you as being just entertaining and funny guy, Tom Merritt. It's like, no, but here's Tom Merritt, and Tom Merritt knows his shit.
Well, I try to. Thank you. I'm glad you think so anyway. So the fooling is working.
You fooled one more person.
Well, and the other thing, going back to the CNET days, especially on Buzz Out Loud, I'm also very argumentative. So, when I talk to Molly and Veronica and Jason, whatever side they took, I would try to figure out like, okay, but what's the other side? What's the other angle?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's honestly to, since Corey's going to say, hey, here's how this influenced me. I think that's influenced me too, because it's like, I've always been able to see both sides fairly easily, but never quite verbalize both sides. Like even with my day job as a phone salesman in a Target, I'm an Android fan. I mean, I've got freaking Samsung watch, Samsung phone, all that stuff. I've, eat, sleep, and breathe, Android. I don't let that affect when people are like, oh, I want to get an iPhone. I'm like, sure. And then I'm like, here's what they have about it from what I know, usually from what I've heard from Tom Merritt. And I'll spout off the facts that I know, and they'll be like, oh, okay, that sounds cool. I'm like, but if you want, there's also this thing that's coming out here soon, or this way you can get over here. And if it sways them, cool. If not, oh well, they got what they want.
Yeah. I mean, I got a lot of that from Leo as well. I mean, Leo really was what brought me into working in tech. What got me pushed over to working at the tech bench in Best Buy and working for Geek Squad down the road, and feeling like I wanted to educate people about tech as much as possible, and not just from the point of view of like, oh well, AMD is the best processors versus Intel or whatever. Going through this phase, it's like, no, here's the reason why I would prefer it, but that's not necessarily your usage case. But that's the thing, is that through Leo and you, I've discovered other people that I respect and value so much, like Scott Johnson, Jason Howell, Eileen and Jason. I found without even realizing Eileen's relationship to you, but certainly through them being a twit, and it's just, there's so many great people that I think you've all sort of congrued together, and it makes a perfect sense. And it gives you this great base that if you want to be doing things like podcasting or doing tech journalism or doing technology in a teaching respect or anything else, these are the people that you kind of go and you draw from.
Yeah, it's like the Tech TV extended family, because, you know, Leo, obviously the master at help and how to, came not just out of Tech TV, obviously had a big career before that, but he sort of led the charge out of Tech TV with Twit, and Kevin Rose and Roger Chang, who produces for me now. And there's just so many people who started to do things. And then we started to all pick up folks as well. So, you know, Molly Wood and Veronica, I feel like are part of that same lineage, even though those two never worked at Tech TV. They sort of embody that same spirit. And then Brian Brushwood and Justin Robert Young, and for me, that's just my branch of the tree. There's all these different people doing all these great things.
Yeah, there are the Beatles, and then there are the people that were influenced by the Beatles, and then 5 generations later, there are the people who were influenced by those bands. That you go, yeah, but remember the Beatles? You know, that you kind of owe a lot to them and you don't realize
like,
it.
No, who are the Beatles? And
yeah.
Weren't they on a video game before?
Yeah. They were a cartoon, right?
Yeah.
Oh,
but no, that 5 generations, that's me, because I came in through Brian to then discover, you know, go up the tree, and I'm like, oh, wow. And now it's like I'm doing this here where I'm talking with Corey and Beat and Evan on a weekly basis, and I'm getting to meet people that, like I said, are, you know, podcasting heroes of mine, and, you know, just flat out interesting people to talk to. And it's like, this is cool. If I could do this for a living, I would do this. Just, you know, sit here and just talk to people, you know.
Well, that's the beautiful thing of what the internet has done, and it's the thing that I'm always constantly on guard to identify if we're starting to lose it, which is that permissionless ability, not just to innovate. You hear Silicon Valley people talking all the time about permissionless innovation, but permissionless contact. Just all of us being able to go out there and meet and talk and share ideas without necessarily having someone in between that says, oh, well, you have to pay for that, or you have to ask for that. You're like, you pay to get into the internet, and then that's it. Once you're out there, you can do what you want.
Yeah.
Hopefully it stays that way.
Yeah, I hope so too.
So speaking of creating art and losing the gatekeepers to your audience, tell us a little bit about writing Pilot X. Now, you've self-published stuff before, but Pilot X you've done through Inkshares, if I'm correct.
Yeah, I'm sorry to tell you, Corey, it's a time travel story. It's another time travel story. But yeah, this is what I've gotten the habit of doing over the years was writing a book during National Novel Writing Month, which happens every year in November, and then taking a little while, usually a few years, to polish the book up, give it to an editor, get it cleaned up, and then self-publish. And Inkshares came along, and we started working with them on Sword and Laser. And what they do is say, look, you've got an idea for a book, put it up on Inkshares. If you can get enough people to pre-order it, we'll publish it. So they have 2 levels. One's called the Quill level, which is basically self-publishing on steroids. If you get 250 people to pre-order your book, they'll publish it as an ebook, and they'll get it out there in front of people. They won't do the full publishing work, but they'll do, they'll do a light edit, and they'll do a little more than you would get if you just went on Amazon and published it yourself on CreateSpace. If you get 750 pre-orders, then they treat you as a signed author. So instead of having editors doing slush reads and talking to agents, they let the crowd pick what books they'll publish. And those fully published books get a full-on edit. They get a copy edit. They get a cover treatment. They get a narrator for the audiobook. They get sent to Publishers Weekly and put in the books in print, and everything that a normal publisher would do, even up to, shopping it around for movie and TV rights and things like that. So I decided, after we co-published as an imprint with Inkshares a few books, I decided to just put one of my NaNoWriMo books up there instead of self-publishing it, and was lucky enough to get enough pre-orders, and it's coming out March 14th.
Now, I don't mean to steal your thunder there, but do you mean books like the Life Engineered?
I didn't even have the video fully up, and I saw the bottom of it. I'm like, oh, that's JF's book. I recognize that book anywhere.
JF was the introducer of us to Inkshares. I think he was the introduction for a lot of people, but certainly in the podcasting community, to what Inkshares did. And we were very excited to see how successful he's been with it. His next book is coming up for them. And then I was listening to him on Mind of a Geek that he was on this weekend today, and he's writing some books for Ed Greenwood, which is incredible. Now, that's not through Inkshares, but it's still like, this is a guy who just a couple years ago was publishing his first book and doing it through essentially a crowdfunded thing. I think that's brilliant. And I think it's really cool to see you pick up on that too, because you have been publishing books for a long time, and I've followed you with doing your Nano stuff. I've tried Nano a couple of times. I haven't gotten to the polish and edit part yet, but it's still incredible to me to see something that you've done, that you do as a personal challenge to yourself, and then you take it to that next level and you put it out there and show it to an audience.
Yeah, it's a world of difference to have a team of people helping you versus just going out and saying, okay, I have a friend who's an editor, I'll hire her to do an edit, and she does a great job, and she's a professional. So when I got the editor through Inkshares, it was a very familiar process, but it's also, a one pass situation. And then I just put that out, right? I didn't have anybody else looking at it. I didn't have a second editor or anything like that. And it's up to me to go out and tell people about it. And the reason I did that was surely out of laziness. I didn't want to pursue an agent. I didn't want to pursue marketing. I just wanted to write a story and have some people read it and tell me what they thought of it. With Inkshares, I was like, all right, well, let's step it up to the next level, not fully to the agent publisher level, but almost there. And what I had learned with JF's book and the other Sword and Laser books that we did was, this is a real publisher. What Inkshares does, and I didn't realize this until we were going through all of the, God in the Shed or the Life Engineered and the other books, is that they're not kidding around. Like, this is all the things that a publisher does. They are a real publisher. The only difference is it's up to the crowd to decide what goes on their list.
Yeah, instead of having somebody who goes out there and headhunts for writers, you have them come to you, and you have them sort of prove themselves by being able to draw an audience in the first place. Yeah, which is not a terrible way to go. I mean, you as a self-published author, you try to build your audience yourself. You try to do it either through podcasting or through social media, just in general, whatever you can do to kind of build it up and say, hey, also, I wrote this thing. Maybe you want to check it out. I'd love to hear what you have to think about it.
Yeah, exactly. And so I take all of that experience and then build up the pre-orders to get it going, and then handed it over to something. And it's, I'm not going to lie, it's a thrill to see Publishers Weekly writing up Pilot X. It's a huge thrill to see Gary Whitta with a pull quote on the front of the review copy that went out, listed as, screenwriter of Rogue One. It's crazy. And seeing it up in Audible is fantastic. It's a whole different level of publishing.
As a fan, I get those emails that come in about once a week or so from Inkshares that just say, hey, here's how many people discovered Pilot X this week. Here's how many people bought Pilot X this week. And I always get super excited because I'm like, Tom just sold more books, and that's through Inkshares itself. Now, is that also showing the numbers sold through Amazon or other places?
I think
or
that's
is it
just the stuff that Inkshares is selling directly. No, I don't think that includes pre-orders and things like that. That's
just really, really, truly awesome. And I'm always excited for you when I see stuff like this take off, because you're a multi-talented person, but it's one of those things that I don't think people realize, the things that you do outside of podcasting, or when they're surprised, like, oh, what's Tom doing this show about other stuff when I thought he was a tech guy? Yeah, for sure. No, I've always wanted to write. I've been writing longer than I've been podcasting, and I've always wanted to talk about different things than just technology. I was doing other things besides technology before I even started working on the web at Tech TV. Those are just the things that kind of rose to prominence first. And it doesn't mean I don't enjoy doing them. I totally do. Well, I mean, it's sort of like you created, or you're one of the creators of the business of tech reporting, because I don't think there was a lot of that. There certainly wasn't the focus on it. It was like, okay, you get the occasional things. And I grew up reading Family Computing Magazine and PC World and all those other things too. But to have it become like, oh, now there's a station that you can watch that's full of this information. Right. Like I lived off of Tech TV for a couple of years there when it was going strong. Me too. Yeah. I paid my salary. It pretty much was 90% of my consumption. Wow. That's great. I miss it. Yeah. But at the same time, the fact that you guys have gone on to take control of your own destiny with it, and you didn't let it drying up affect you to the point where you stopped doing what you were doing, or you moved over to something else, which would have been okay. It's not like we would have lost Tom Merritt, but it still would have been. Well, one of the things that one of my first jobs at the Screensavers was coming up with the topic of the day. And essentially what I had to do was look over all the news of the day and prepare a short bit about each one to present in our daily production meeting, so we could pick which one would become our main poll question at the top of the show. And then I would write a column about it. And that process is essentially the process that grew into Buzz Out Loud and Tech News Today and now Daily Tech News Show, which is look at all the tech news of the day, write up short bits about them, and then expand on the ones that are the most interesting. Yeah, and when you're not doing that, you make an almanac about it. Yeah, right. About just keep all the events in history and keep adding to it.
So, if you could do a podcast about anything that you're not doing right now, what would that be?
I mean, that's a horrible question. You're tempting me to like come up with even more ideas, which I don't need. I come up with ideas about this all the time. I'm like, and some of my friends like Justin make fun of me when I'm like, hey, I got an idea for a new podcast. He's like, what's new? But yeah, I've recently, one of the things that I've wanted to do is like a weekly essay show where I just maybe sometimes with a guest and maybe sometimes just me, just kind of dig deep into what I think about a particular issue, and not necessarily a technology issue, like just could be anything. I've often thought about doing a This Week in Everything, where I invite folks on and all my guests each bring in one burning issue. So it's kind of a similar idea to the essay episode, but sort of leaving the door wide open so that somebody can just bring in something that they're most passionate about. And then the trick there is having good enough bookings that you have a variety of people that are willing to comment on each other's ideas and expand all of our understanding of it. Yeah. I think that's also a show that I've plotted out in my head more than a little bit. And
a couple times in post shows.
Yeah. I think that there's something that when you have such great stimulating conversations with fantastic guests all the time, it starts to make you think about things in a more philosophical nature. Yeah. And you're drawn more to the discussion and the back and forth than you are to just review shows and comics or horror movies like I do on my other show. It's like I want to go deeper with these people because I have such a great time talking to them. Well, I think that probably brings us to the close of the show. I do want to just make one more little fanboy statement. A few years ago in my role-playing group, we did a superhero game. And the basis for my superhero character, which is now the basis for a series of books that I am plotting out and trying to work on, is you.
Oh, okay.
Not you specifically. He's not a podcaster. He's a younger gentleman, but my whole inspiration was based around Tom Merritt. And the character's name is actually Merritt, as like a merit badge. I just, it's one of those things that I've always kind of like had in the back of my head. It's like, someday I'm going to write this book and it's going to be about Tom Merritt, and I'm going to be able to go up to him and show it to him and just say, thank you for this.
Well, I am extremely honored. And one of the books that is still being edited, and I'm going to self-publish. I probably won't put this one on Inkshares.
You can say it's me. I'm okay with that.
Well, it's not based on you, sadly. It's not quite that much Turnabout is Fair Play, but it's based on the hosts of The Angry Chicken, because the year that I was writing that NaNoWriMo, they had just launched their show, and I had their voices in my head, and I was like, I can make all these characters talk like these three people, and they're cool people, and it's fun. So I guess the reason I'm saying that is I totally understand that idea of like having a personality in your head, and you're like, oh, I want to just make that into a character. So I'm honored. Thank you.
Oh, absolutely. I think Eileen's in there too.
Woo! I'll tell her.
So, Tom, where's the easiest place for people to find the things that you do?
Yeah, probably the website, tommerritt.com, TOMMERRITT.com. It collects together a page with links to all my shows and blog posts for every show as that gets posted, and all kinds of good stuff like that.
Nice. And if you listeners want to contact us by leaving us a voicemail, you can do that at 805-328-3966, or you can email us mail@ElseNerds.com. All of our subscription links can be found under gncast.com/subscribe. The Facebook page, just search for Galactic Netcasts. You can follow us on Twitter. The show is at ElseNerds. The network is at Galactic Netcasts. Our producers, Beatmaster80, Mr_Fusion. I could be found at that Gregor. Corey, where can people find you?
You can find the comics that I help publish every week at don'taskcomics.com.
All right, and the final thing that's to be said is this has been a Don't Tell Glenn production. We will see you next week.
Or else Tom Merritt.